I started working at the library on a chilly Tuesday in September, the kind of day where the leaves just begin to betray autumn with splashes of orange and red. I was freshly graduated, still wrapped tightly in the idealistic veneer that comes with 4 years of English Lit, drowning in debt and desperate enough to take the first job that would have me. The Lindwood Public Library seemed charming in an old, time-stained sort of way. Nestled between a decaying diner and a pawn shop, painted in peeling layers of white and gray, it reeked of must and paper, my kind of sanctuary. The interview with Mrs. Hummel, the head librarian, was as quaint and outdated as the building. She was a severe woman masked behind owl-like glasses and a habit of smelling faintly like lavender mixed with mothballs. It ended with her handing me a single key, a swipe card, and a sheet of 5 rules typed in stark, impersonal font. "Adhere to these strictly," she advised, with a pointed look that suggested her spectacles were the least severe thing about her. 1. No food or drink beyond the lobby. 2. Shelve all returns by closing time, no exceptions. 3. Do not disrupt the silence in the special collections room. 4. Never turn off the lights, even after hours. 5. Lock the north wing door promptly at 8 p.m. Do not open until sunrise. The rules seemed straightforward enough, if peculiar in their specificity. I breezed through the first day, shelving books with a misplaced verve that only the newly employed could possess. I stayed late, determined to impress, and not once did I consider how odd it was that I hadn't seen another soul since noon. Nightfall came stealthily, as it often did amidst shelves. I was lost in the rhythmic dance of putting things in order when a cracking voice over the intercom startled me. "Reminder, the north wing door, please." It was an old system, scratchy and low. I checked my watch, 8:05 p.m. Damn. With a feeling much like the sinking of one's stomach after missing the last step in the dark, I hurried to the north wing. The long hallway felt narrower than it had under the pale light of day, shaded by unsteady fluorescence that flickered more than they shone. My own footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, as though they were bouncing off the walls instead of absorbing into the carpet. I locked the north wing door, a hollow metallic click echoing more somberly than I expected. Goosebumps raised on my arms, not from cold. There was a warmth emanating from the door's other side, like the breath of something vast and sleeping. I told myself it was the heating system acting up, old buildings, old pipes. That night I lay restlessly in bed, my apartment a few blocks away from the library, yet feeling too close for comfort. The rules reverberated in my head, not the words but the weight behind them. Lock the north wing door. No exceptions. Why? The next day met me with more mundane tasks. Returns were piled high by the checkout desk, Mrs. Hummel's disappointed glare greeting me before her usual terse, "Good morning." I was shelving in the autobiographies when Keith, the only other employee I'd seen who looked a few years beyond retirement, shuffled by. "Watch the stacks," he muttered, not quite meeting my eye. "Anything I should look out for?" I joked, half expecting him to warn me about paper cuts. He paused, gave a look around as if to make sure the books wouldn't listen, and leaned closer. "Some say things move when you're not looking directly at them," he said quietly, a tremor in his voice making me unsure whether he was having me on. "Right, haunted books. Got it," I replied, more from discomfort than disbelief. Keith didn't laugh. Later, as I was organizing periodicals, the scent of vanilla caught me off guard. It was out of place between the dusty musk and ink. Following the unexpected sweetness led me to special collections, a room I hadn't yet ventured into, shielded by a heavy oak door that always seemed closed. I pressed my ear against the wood, heart thumping oddly, expecting to hear something, a whisper, a rustle, anything. Nothing came, but that in itself felt like a suppression, a held breath. Disconcerted but undeterred, I gripped the knob, just as the clock tower outside tolled for the late afternoon. The door wouldn't budge. Locked. My swipe card forgotten, I glanced down the rules list in my pocket, eyes catching on a detail I hadn't focused on before. Do not disrupt the silence in the Special Collections Asterisk room. I realized then it wasn't about sound. It was about presence. The vanilla scent dissipated suddenly, replaced by a cold draft that nipped at my ankles and raised every hair on my neck. Turning, nothing seemed changed, and yet everything felt off, like I had crossed an unseen line. I was left standing alone, the creeping dread settling deep in my bones as I wondered, not entirely wanting the answer. What exactly was I employed to gua? Ard. The shift from sweet vanilla to the biting cold was unnerving. A shudder ran up my spine, pooling an icy fear in the pit of my stomach. The floorboards creaked gently beneath my feet, as if sympathizing with my every cautious step. My job description, to merely watch over the place overnight until the owner returned in the morning, rang hollow now, morphing into a question I couldn't answer. Watch over what? I forced myself to move, my feet barely making a sound. The air seemed to thicken with each step forward, as though I moved through invisible molasses. The dim light from my flashlight cut a feeble path through the darkness, the edges of its beam dissolving too quickly into the black. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a slight movement, a curtain fluttering against a window, though the window was shut. No draft did that, I muttered under my breath, my voice louder in the stillness than I intended. I paused, listening. A low groan, like wood mourning its age, resonated through the hallway towards me. Forcing down the impulse to call out, I crept forward, the sound guiding my tentative steps. Reaching the window, I examined it closely. Sealed, no broken panes, no gaps. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was unnaturally cold, sapping the warmth from my palm. I recoiled instinctively, wrapping my arms around myself. My breath clouded in the air before me, a ghostly mist in the flashlight's beam. Turning back to the dark corridor, my pulse quickened. It felt as if the house was holding its breath along with me, every room waiting for a sign to release some pent-up scream. I moved on, my resolve buckling with each quiet thud of my heart. The portraits on the walls watched me, their eyes glistening slightly under the weak beam, full of secret knowing. As I descended deeper into the house's belly, the silence grew oppressive, almost tangible. It wasn't until I reached the basement door that the stillness broke with another noise, a whispering. Not words, but a sibilance that teased the edges of my mind, urging me deeper, urging me away. I couldn't tell. I hesitated, hand resting on the old brass doorknob, cool and slightly worn. The whispering grew louder, a hissing that seemed almost angry. Gripping the doorknob tighter, I steeled myself and opened the door. The stairs descended into blackness, the light from my flashlight seemingly swallowed by it. Step by step, I made my way down, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. The basement air was colder, clinging to my skin with damp fingers. The smell was different here, not musty, as one would expect, but metallic, like freshly spilled blood. Reaching the foot of the stairs, my light finally found something in the darkness, an object in the center of the room, covered with a dusty tarp. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I approached it. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony inside my head as my hand reached out, trembling, to pull away the cover. Beneath it was an old mirror, ornately framed but dulled by time. The glass was not merely reflective, it seemed to pulse faintly, holding a depth that was impossible. My reflection was pale, more a shadow than a man. But behind my shoulder in the mirror, another shape flickered, indistinct but undeniably there. I whirled around, flashlight flaring wildly. Nothing, the room was empty. Heart racing, I faced the mirror again. The shape was clearer now, a dark silhouette of a person, standing right where I stood. I reached out a hand, and so did it. A cold dread filled me as I touched the glass. It was no longer cold. It was warm, like skin. Underneath my hand, the glass began to ripple. I tried to pull away, but my hand stuck fast, the warm glass clinging like molasses, pulling me closer. Desperate, I yanked backward with all my might, stumbling back as I broke free. The mirror's surface calmed, my reflection returned to normal. I didn't look back as I fled up the stairs, the whispers chasing me, always just a breath away. As I reached the main floor and slammed the basement door shut behind me, one thought hammered in my mind. What exactly was that mirror guarding or imprisoning? I leaned against the door, panting, my whole body shaking from what I had seen. And somewhere, deep within the house, something laughed, a low, delighted chuckle that echoed through the dark hallways. The sound was wrong, full of dark amusement and hunger. I knew then that the night was far from over. Tears stained my cheeks, warm and slick, as I fought to control my shallow, jagged breaths. Slowly, the laughter faded, swallowed up by the thick silence that now pressed in around me like a suffocating blanket. My fingers still clutched the doorknob behind me, cold and unyielding, my only anchor in a sea of terror. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, old timbers laughing at their own jokes. But lies, no matter how sweet, couldn't mask the staleness of the air, or the icy draft that tickled the back of my neck, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I had to move. The thought scratched at my mind, frantic like a trapped mouse. But move where? The house was unfamiliar, grand in a way that only accentuated its desolation, an inheritance from an aunt I barely remembered, who now seemed to have left me more than dusty furniture and faded photographs. Steeling my nerves, I pushed away from the door and edged down the hallway, my steps hesitant. The floorboards groaned underfoot, as though protesting each tentative advance. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and I fumbled in my pocket for the flashlight I had dropped in my earlier panic. As my fingers closed around the cool metal, a shiver of relief washed over me, quickly quenched by a new, nearby noise, a soft, scraping sound, like the brush of stiff bristles on wood. It was moving, slow and deliberate, from the end of the hall toward me. I pressed the flashlight switch, a bloom of stark, white light cutting through the gloom. The beam trembled with my hands, scattering wild shadows across the walls. Nothing, the corridor was empty, save for the lined portraits of stern, unsmiling ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. I tried to laugh off the terror, a sound hollow and flat in my ears. Was my own mind crafting monsters in the shadows? I continued forward, each room I glanced into swallowed by darkness, more felt than seen. A library with shelves choked by cobwebs, a parlor draped in dust-covered velvet, and a dining room set for a meal never eaten. Each room felt like a still frame of a life paused mid-breath, waiting, always waiting. Turning a corner, I entered the kitchen. It was larger than I remembered from my brief daytime tour, a relic of the past with its massive hearth and iron pots, all shrouded in darkness. I swept the light over the room, and then I saw it, a door I hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind an old armoire. It was slightly ajar, breathing out a chill that felt alive, purposeful. Heart pounding, I approached the door, each step heavy with dread. The air grew colder, the edges of my vision tinged with gray. My hand touched the door, pushing it gently. It creaked open without resistance, revealing stairs leading down into an abyssal darkness. I descended, the flashlight's beam our only guide into the bowels of the house, each step echoing ominously around me. The air was damp, filled with the smell of moss and wet stone. I reached the bottom, the space opening into a large cellar cluttered with forgotten treasures and trunks swollen from humidity. A sudden, sharp intake of breath that wasn't mine froze me in place. My heart stumbled, my grip on the flashlight tightening. It came again, closer this time, a sigh laden with sorrow and longing. The beam of my flashlight flickered, the shadows dancing derisively. In the furthest corner of the cellar, something moved, a subtle shifting in the dark. I aimed the light's shaky beam toward it. First, all I saw were the boxes. Then, something unlike anything meant to walk this earth crawled, slow and deliberate, out of the shadows, its eyes hollow pits of despair and madness staring right into mine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. As it approached, a whimper escaped me, the sound tiny and broken. My mind screamed to run, to escape, but my body disobeyed, frozen by the sight of this nightmare made flesh. Just as it reached out, a bony hand extending with inevitable certainty, the house shuddered violently. A deafening crack tore through the air, the floor beneath me giving way. I fell, the scream lodged in my throat, into darkness that embraced me like an old, unwelcome friend. And all the while, something laughed, a low, delighted chuckle that echoed through the crumbling house. My descent was halted by the cold embrace of debris, the fallen timbers and plaster forming a treacherous cradle around me. My breath stuttered, each inhale a shard of pain due to the impact, my ribs crying out with the effort. The laughter, however, continued unabated, its glee magnified by the confines of the new, darker space I had plunged into. Through the haze of dust and pain, I discerned a dim light flickering somewhere above, the floor I had crashed through now a ceiling, punctured by the jagged teeth of broken beams. The light cast shadows that danced like specters, and among these shifting forms, my heart lurched as I caught sight of it again, that hand. It was just a silhouette now, but it reached through the gap, grasping, as if the fall had been a mere inconvenience. With effort, I pushed myself up, ignoring the sharp protests of my body. The space around me was tight, the air stale and thick with the scent of mold. The ground felt oddly uneven, and as I shifted, a soft clatter echoed nearby. My fingers brushed against something small and hard. By the faint light, I saw the gleaming curve of a bone. Small, perhaps a finger. Recoiling, I shuffled backward, the reality of my resting place clawing its way into my consciousness. I was surrounded by remnants. The house, I knew it had been abandoned long before my desperate search brought me here. An heirloom mystery my grandfather never spoke of, but left clues to uncover. Its secrets were buried deep like the bones I now rested upon, hidden beneath layers of neglect and decay. As I tried to piece together my next move, the chuckle resurfaced, closer now. It was no longer an echo, but a whisper in my ear, as if the house itself confided in me, relishing its tale of perpetual despair. Pulling myself through the cramped underbelly of the house, the air grew colder, denser. My hand found a wall and I followed it, relief mingling with fear. Then my fingers slipped into something wet, viscous. I jerked back, my hand now coated with a substance as dark as the void around me. The smell was metallic, primal, blood. My stomach churned, old houses did not bleed. The laughter crescendoed into a manic cacophony, reverberating through the tight space, forcing me onward, driven by a need to escape the sound more than find a way out. The path twisted unexpectedly, and I realized that I was no longer merely under the house, but within something else, a structure beneath the structure, a hidden layer not meant to be tread by the living. A dull throb pulsed through the air, synchronous with my heartbeat. Or perhaps it was my heartbeat, echoed back at me by the house's own macabre rhythm. Now the path widened, and the space opened into what could only be a cellar, vast and forgotten. Chains hung from the low ceiling, clinking softly with unseen currents. In the center, a chair, and upon it, a shape that might once have been human, bound and slumped, its features obscured by time and darkness. I approached, my mind screaming to flee, but an inexplicable compulsion drew me closer. The figure stirred, the subtle shift of dust and debris lending life to it. Then, a flash of white as it turned its head, eyes hollow, yet alight with an unholy awareness, fixated upon me with a hunger that turned my blood to ice. The creature, for no human shell could house such malevolence, opened its mouth, and the sound that issued forth was no longer laughter, but a wail that scraped the very marrow from my bones. It asked a question, or perhaps it was a demand, in a tongue lost to time yet understood by the primal fear it evoked. Falling back, I scrambled for an exit, the creature's cry echoing in my skull. But the house moaned again, timbers shifting as if to seal me within. Light seemed to extinguish itself by fractions, the darkness growing as if fed by my terror. Above, a faint glow offered the barest promise of escape. Dragging myself toward it, I dared not look back, though every fiber of my being felt the creature's gaze piercing through me, its voice a haunting refrain promising that this was not the end, but a beginning. My hand found the edge of a broken floorboard above, and I pulled, muscles burning with effort, the house groaning in resistance. As I hoisted myself up and out of that accursed pit, the light revealed the true horror. Across every surface above, etched into the very walls, were countless scratches, tally marks of those who had come before and never left. The house was alive, I realized with terror, not with ghosts or spirits, but with something older, hungrier, and more relentless. It didn't just want occupants, it wanted prisoners, and I had nearly become its next.